The United States looked a lot different in the 1960s. The decade started with John F. Kennedy promising the New Frontier, which was a package of laws that sought to eliminate injustice and inequality in the United States. Everyone was excited for the future of America. Then he was shot and killed. But the decade ended with the first humans landing on the moon, which was pretty cool. It's April 2024, and you're watching the first ever video on Money Boost. The 60s was a decade of change in many ways, and many of these changes involve the home. Where we live, how we live, and who we live with are all very different today than they were 60 years ago. In 1960, the median home cost was $11,900, while the median income was $5,600 a year, meaning a price-to-income ratio of about 2 to 1. In a 2019 study, the median home cost was $240,500, with a median income of $68,703, a price-to-income ratio of 3 to 5, or something like that. I failed math at school. But obviously, home prices in the past 60 years have increased a lot faster than salaries, and COVID only made this worse. But it's not even just about the salaries and home costs. If you've left your parents' basement anytime recently, like I did a few times last year, you must have noticed that everything's kind of expensive. So obviously the living costs have risen too fast, or the salaries too slow. But which one is it? Everything increases just because of inflation. But if I had to guess, and according to studies, the salaries are not rising faster because employers simply don't need to pay you more. Salaries in general have actually beaten the inflation over the past 50 years, ignoring the inflation spike in the past few years. The median income in 1960 was just $5,600 a year, like I mentioned, but there are two big caveats. The first is that higher salary positions have increased more than the average, while lower salary positions have increased less than the average. This means that the people generally most in need of wage increases either barely saw their wages keep up with inflation or saw them lose ground, while living costs have gone up even faster. Death, taxes, and the rich getting richer and the poor staying poor, the three certain things in life. The second issue is that wages are stickier than inflation, meaning that it generally takes a couple years for wages to respond to inflation. It hasn't always been this bad, even in recent times. The past few years have had abnormally high inflation due to COVID and some other things. This time, the delay between inflation happening and wages increasing to compensate is more noticeable and painful than usual, and it will take a while for some industries to raise their wages. As a result, the middle and upper middle classes have had mostly stable or increasing purchasing power, while the lower classes have been losing ground. So basically, the wages are not rising faster because the people or companies who pay them don't need to raise them. And it's not just that they don't want to. Increasing wages too fast increases inflation, because in order to maintain corporate profits after an increase in wages, employers must increase the prices they charge for the goods and services they provide. I mean, sure, some companies are just printing money, and it can feel unfair that the employees don't get paid more. But even if these few companies did raise their wages significantly, it would affect the economy and cause inflation to rise as well, just making everything more expensive than it already is. So if increasing wages too fast increases inflation, which in turn makes your groceries more expensive, is the largest living expense, which of course is housing, the issue after all? Why exactly is buying and renting a house or apartment so expensive nowadays? Well, the answer is not as simple as rich people buy all the homes. But let's try to figure it out. Housing costs have obviously risen, but adjusted to inflation, the rise is not actually as large in many areas as you might expect. When old people talk about buying their first home back in the good old days, they usually talk about a suburban house outside a city. Back then, these areas were not as populated. It's supply and demand. Not all of it, but a lot of it. While rural areas of the United States have maintained roughly the same population, 54 million in 1960 and 57 million in 2020, urban areas have gained nearly 150 million inhabitants in the last 6 decades. So you can think of this as pretty much all the people who were born in the past 60 years. And of course, the comically large amounts of illegal immigrants the U.S. lets into the country for whatever reason are all going to these same urban areas. Again, supply and demand. More people want to live in these same places. Of course, the prices are also going up. Wages in these high-cost areas have gone up faster than the average, but the issue is that it's not fast enough compared to living costs. This is why we're having these tech bros in Silicon Valley earning $500,000 a year or something and still living in their car. But who cares about what housing prices were in the 60s? Why have prices increased even faster in the past 10 to 15 years? A growing housing supply shortage is one of the main reasons for the housing affordability crisis. Following the Great Recession in 2008, the share of homes being built fell significantly, causing buyer demand to exceed housing production. Fewer new homes were built in the decade following the Great Recession than in any decade since the 1960s. In the United States today, there is a shortfall of over 3 million homes, and currently it's still only getting worse. So why not just build more houses? Personally, I think we should do just that. But I could be wrong since I only did research for a few minutes while taking a shit at McDonald's. But today's zoning laws and other regulations have made it much more difficult and expensive to build homes, especially small houses. The builders make more profit off larger homes, and also people just don't want to or can't live in small houses anymore. The policymakers are supposedly trying to introduce new policies that would relax zoning restrictions that in many cases hinder affordable housing construction. This would bring the whole market down, so you'll know in advance if this is going to happen when the politicians start selling their real estate portfolio. This was the first ever Money Boost video. Thanks for watching and have a nice life.